Ever since I started leatherworking a little over a year ago, I've stored all my stitching tools in this flimsy cardboard box. Well, no longer, because today I'm going to show you how I made this leather and wood toolbox to replace it. Let's get to it. I knew I wanted to store the needles on the side of the box, so I found something round that was at least as tall as the needles, and then used that to trace out the round ends of what will become the wooden sides of the box. A friend recently sent me this beautiful poplar that has tons of character, and I thought it would be the perfect complement to the leather. First, I used my table saw to cut one side, and then used that as a reference to cut the other side to the same height. Next, I cut a thin piece of 1/4 inch plywood, which will become the divider and run down the middle of the box from side to side. Then I cut a slot halfway through the center of each side, which I will then insert and glue the plywood in. Next, I used my disc sander to creep up on the rounded edges I had drawn earlier. Then, just like before, I used one side as a reference to draw the curved line on the other side to ensure they matched perfectly. After giving them a quick sand with my palm sander, I brought all 3 pieces back to the shop to do a quick test fit before moving on to the leather portion of the build. The width of the box ended up being exactly 9 inches side to side. To measure out how long the piece of leather would need to be, I used a piece of paper towel to create a template which ended up being 16 inches long. Therefore, I would need a piece of leather 9 by 16 inches long. To give the top flap a little more of a finished appearance, I used an inexpensive corner punch to round the corners. This next step is completely unnecessary, and its only purpose is purely for aesthetics, but I like the look of stitching on leather, so I added a saddle stitch border around the entire piece of leather. To ensure the spacing between each hole stays consistent as I work down the line, I always make sure to place the stitching chisel point furthest to the left in the last hole of the previous set of holes I punched. There are a lot of videos out there on how to stitch to get the best results, and I'll link to one of my favorites above, but what I've found is easiest is to just pick a sequence and stick to that. For example, I always start using the right needle to stitch from the back and then stitch the left needle from the front into the same hole but in front and under the right needle's thread. If you continue this sequence, you'll get a very nice looking stitch pattern in my experience. With the stitching done, I switched back to the wooden sides. To prep for finish, I popped the grain with some water and then sanded them one more time with 320 grit sandpaper. For finish, I went with Walrus Oil's cutting board oil. Yes, I know this isn't a cutting board, but I like the way it makes the character and the poplar pop, so I went with it. I I needed some sort of closure mechanism for the lid, so I decided to engrave my logo on a couple circles of leather and then stitch them to the lid and the front, sandwiching a magnet in between the leather. To attach the plywood divider to the two side pieces, I used some Starbond thick CA glue and accelerator. Next, I did a dry fit to get an idea of where I would attach the leather to the wood. Then I punched a hole on each side at the top of the front for a couple of screws that I will add to secure it. Before I attached the leather, I used some Tokonol leather finish to give the edges a quick burnish. Next, using the holes I punched in the leather as a guide, I marked out where to drill the hole for the screw, and then I drilled a pilot hole. In addition to the screws, I used Tandy Leather's Eco Weld to glue the leather to the wood, and then added the front screws. I also added screws in the back where I wanted the lid to pivot open and closed. With the leather attached, the only thing left was to add a little magnetic strip to one of the sides to hold my various stitching needles. And with that, the box was done. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that subscribe and bell button. I also post a lot of behind the scenes and smaller scale projects as Ethan Carter Designs on Instagram, and would love to have you follow me there as well. I've also queued up a couple more videos I know you'll enjoy right here. Thanks for watching.